Starting to build trust in your body again is a huge piece of the puzzle. If your body doesn't feel safe and it doesn't have trust in what you are going to do, that's again where that neuromuscular system kicks in and it creates this safety net, which in this case presents as a lot of tension and guarding. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Unchoreographed podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jenna Lower. So tell me if this sounds familiar to you. You constantly feel tight and tense in your hips. And so all you do is stretch and stretch and stretch and maybe lay on a foam roller or lacrosse ball. And it feels like you have to do that all day long to get any sort of relief. So you do the stretching, maybe it gives a little bit of temporary relief, but as soon as you go back to doing whatever you were doing, it tenses right back up and it feels like you are back to square one. If this sounds like something that you've experienced, you sound like a lot of the clients that I see. I hear this all the time. They tell me they feel so tense and tight and all they want to do is stretch, yet the stretching doesn't actually change anything for them. And what that usually signifies to us is that it's not actually a problem with mobility. It's very likely a problem with something else. And today, that's what we're going to talk about. We are going to talk about the role of the neuromuscular system in your constant tension and tightness that you're feeling in your hip joint. So again, I think this is one of those really common problems or I guess solutions that people often think is what's going to make the difference is getting on that foam roller for sometimes a really long period of time, or they dig the lacrosse ball in to their hip joint or a kettlebell or something, or it's just constantly stretching specifically the hip flexors. I think that's the body area that most people tend to go to when they're struggling with impingement, because a lot of the tightness presents itself on the front side of the joint. And so, while it absolutely does feel like tension, just because something feels tight doesn't actually mean that the muscle is physically too short and doesn't have enough flexibility. Sometimes it's a sign of something much deeper. And in this case, if you are doing all of the stretching and all the foam rolling and you're like, nothing is changing, it's not helping long-term at all, I would definitely tell you that that points to muscle length not being your biggest issue. And so when we start to look at, well, what are some of the other factors that lead us to feeling really tense and tight all the time if it's not a length issue, this is where we want to look at the neuromuscular system. So our neuromuscular system is basically what connects our brain to our muscles. There are, nerves that get sent, our brain sends the signal to the nerves and the nerves tell the muscle to do something that it's supposed to do. And so obviously this is interwoven throughout our entire body. We have nerves everywhere, and they innervate all the different muscles. And so we have to pay attention not just to how we're using stability and strength, but how the signal is getting there, which again is the neuromuscular system. Your brain's job is to try to protect your body. So if it perceives something as a threat, it's going to try to protect you. And what it does is it basically sends a signal that says, ooh, this isn't safe. We better get ready. We better get ready to fight, right? You've heard of the fight or flight response. This is where this goes into action. And the problem is your body doesn't always recognize the difference of I'm being chased by a bear versus, this squat makes my hip pinch and it doesn't feel very good. And so it responds in the same way, which is a lot of tensing, guarding, and protection. This is extremely helpful when we have an acute injury. So say you sprain your ankle, your body needs a way of telling itself, hey, don't re-sprain your ankle. So when you step wrong or you're just walking, right, it's going to tense and guard up those muscles so that the ankle doesn't roll again. So it's great in that protective role. The problem is if it goes on too long, instead of being protective, it actually becomes problematic. And this is exactly what happens with impingement and labral tears, especially if you've been struggling with it for a long period of time. The longer that the pain has been going on for, the more ingrained these patterns get, and sometimes the harder it is to change them. You can still change them, but it just takes a little bit more work and repetition and time to see those changes happen. But essentially, our body will, again, perceive this threat. And so it's going to tense and guard to make sure that you don't do something that doesn't feel good to your body. It's trying to protect you from feeling more pain. And again, this becomes quite problematic in the case of hip injuries, because that extra protective tension is a lot of the muscle tightness and stiffness that you are feeling on a day-to-day basis. And often those movements that were once protective or being protected against, now you actually need to reintegrate those things, right? We can't avoid squatting forever. You can't avoid lifting heavy things forever, right? You got to lift groceries and your children and whatever else it is. So we can't avoid these things forever, which means we have to retrain our nervous system that, hey, they're safe again. And starting to build trust in your body again is a huge piece of the puzzle. If your body doesn't feel safe and it doesn't have trust in what you are going to do, that's again where that neuromuscular system kicks in, and it creates this safety net, which in this case presents as a lot of tension and guarding. And I would say the majority of my clients, when they first come into my world, one of the biggest problems that they are having is a ton of muscle guarding and protection around that hip joint. And please know, it's nothing that you're doing wrong, right? Like, this is a very normal thing to experience because it's your brain's way of handling this. And it happens on a very subconscious level. But the problem is it turns into, it turns into too much of a problem versus protective after a while. And so your body has to rebuild trust in itself after a certain point. The only way that it's going to build trust in itself is through gradually reintroducing things that once were a problem and making sure that you're doing it in a way where your body doesn't overreact, but it also doesn't underreact. Because if I've talked about this before, but if you don't challenge your body in certain ways, it never learns to adapt. So there is this moment where you do have to challenge it a little bit in order for it to be able to actually change in any way. But we don't want to challenge it so much that it creates that really big protective guarding and flare up again. So there's definitely a little bit of a balance here. It's a delicate dance of making sure that you are challenging yourself, but not pushing beyond what your body can handle, so that you actually are able to start to re-regulate your nervous system and see those patterns and tension patterns start to reduce. Some of the symptoms or things that you would see in your body if your nervous system is a bit dysregulated, there's a lot of them. We'll just talk about kind of some of the most common things that I see in regards to hip issues. So obviously there's a lot of protective muscle tension, right? So you might be chronically gripping and squeezing at your glutes or your pelvic muscles, your pelvic floor muscles. You also might be noticing that you're a little bit sort of on edge. Again, like the neuromuscular system is everywhere. It's not just in one muscle. So sometimes it will feel like you are sort of in this high stressed state. You're a little bit anxious, a little bit worried. Some of these things aren't even because of our hip. They might be, right? I think there's a lot of fear sometimes around what's going on in your body, but it also could be completely unrelated. It might be something stressful that's going on at work or in your home life. Maybe you've experienced some trauma or something like that. Your body holds on to those things. And so sometimes just feeling higher levels of anxiety and stress, that is a sign that your nervous system is a bit dysregulated. Again, in regards to the hip, I think what ends up happening often is there's that fear spiral. So you feel some pain or you have a flare up and you start Googling things. And that sort of sends you down that spiral of, oh my gosh, like, am I going to have surgery for this? And look at all of these horror stories of people who have failed surgery and I've got a tear. And there's just like all these big scary things around it. And getting stuck in that fear spiral, that then signals to your body like, hey, I don't feel safe right now. And it's going to tense and guard up even more. even if it's not just because something hurts. But people who tend to be in these higher periods of stress will also notice that when their nervous system gets a bit dysregulated, their pain also tends to go up. So these are things that you want to pay attention to, right? It's not always just in relation to a specific movement or something that physically hurts your hip. There's a lot of external factors that play into this as well. You might also notice that your breathing pattern changes, right? Like a lot of times we talk about this diaphragmatic breathing and deeper breaths and not breathing so much for the chest and these shallow breaths, because you'll even feel the difference. If you take a bunch of short little shallow breaths, it almost feels like all your muscles just tense and guard up a little bit more, versus when you do some diaphragmatic breath work and you really focus on breathing into that belly and down training that nervous system, things start to change a little bit more and it starts to re-regulate. So those are also some common symptoms of like just how are you breathing. Sometimes something else that we want to look for as well too is like how much muscle control you have. So very often, I guess this isn't necessarily a symptom, but it's a reason that your nervous system might sort of get dysregulated, is if you're doing a lot of really fast, quick, or aggressive movements. So your body, it does not very controlled with those movements. This also will sort of increase that reflexive muscle guarding, so it tries to feel a little bit more stable and controlled. And this can also now present with a lot of guarding and mobility, what feels like a mobility restriction. But again, remember, it's not because the muscle is too short and necessarily needs to be stretched. It's because your nervous system is telling those muscles to grip and tense and tighten. And so you're left feeling like, gosh, I am so stiff and tight. So really paying attention to the root cause of why that is happening is super important. We also see this a lot in our patients who have hypermobility or EDS, because they're already in this state of not enough stability and control in their joints. And so sometimes that neuromuscular system, our body craves stability, right? So it tenses around those joints to create some stability and safety. And that can be really helpful, again, in the case of injuries, but it also is very problematic in the sense that your body is constantly on guard. It's always tensed and ready to go, but we don't necessarily need all of that tension. It's not producing effective stability. It's more a false sense of stability that's happening. And so we actually need to try to reduce some of that protective guarding and then teach it how to be strong and stable on its own. So these are all really important things that we have to pay attention to. Just because you're feeling tight, we don't automatically jump to, I better stretch it. And again, this is generally why for a lot of people, they feel like I do all the stretching and I do all the things and it's not actually getting any better. It doesn't change anything. Basically, you're just telling your system, okay, I'm gonna put these muscles on stretch, but you're never actually teaching it, hey, this is safe again and I can build strength here. And in fact, sometimes it has the complete opposite reaction. Sometimes it makes your body feel even less safe. And so for a lot of people, stretching makes things worse. Their body tends to guard and tense up even more, especially if you're pushing too far into those stretches and you're like, no pain, no gain. I'm going to go as far as I can. That often creates this reflexive tension, which now you're fighting against your body instead of working with it. And it, for many people, actually makes them feel worse. Especially if you're hypermobile, if we start stretching those joints, and even in my non-hypermobile people, right? There's a fair number of clients that I see that are not hypermobile, and this same phenomenon will happen where they stretch and it takes away that joint's sense of stability, which your body does not like. And again, it sends you into a little bit of a flare because suddenly things don't feel safe anymore. So that neuromuscular system goes a little bit out of whack. We end up getting extra muscle guarding. Even though you just spent all this time stretching, it now feels worse than when you started. And so if you're experiencing any of these things, just know that it is really common, but it's not necessarily normal, and there's a lot that you can do to try to correct that. You're probably just not taking the right approach at what it is that you need to do to make that tension go away. So if stretching isn't it in these situations, what does actually help? Well, if we're talking about the nervous system, we must learn, how do I re-regulate my nervous system? How do I teach my body that movement is safe again, and I build a little bit of trust in these things that were once sending me into a little bit of a flare-up? How do we re-regulate all of that? And so there's a few things. We're gonna kind of talk through 3 major things that I think are really easy to get started with for anybody. So the first one, you've probably heard me say it a million times, but we love diaphragmatic breathing. So diaphragmatic breathing is the perfect way if you don't know where to start, you don't know what to do, but you're recognizing that your system is a bit dysregulated. Maybe you don't even recognize that it's dysregulated, but you just know that there's a lot of tension and stretching isn't helping. Breathing is the very first thing that I would tell you to start with. This is extremely important for not only helping release the tension that our muscles are holding, but it's also really good for stress levels, right? It stimulates our vagus nerve, which helps, again, regulate the nervous system and reduce stress that we're feeling. So for a lot of my clients, again, when they're stressed out, that's a trigger for their pain. So when you do some breathing, it kind of kills 2 birds with 1 stone. You are addressing the stress that you're feeling, and then you're also addressing that pain that is a result of that dysregulated nervous system and stress. So breathing is great all around. There's almost never a situation where it's not in some ways helpful. Most of the time you'll notice a decrease in pain or an increase in mobility if this is one of your big issues. And at the very worst that's going to happen is nothing is going to change, right? It's not going to make anything worse, that's for sure. So how do you do diaphragmatic breathing? You probably, if you've followed me for a little while, or you've done any yoga or things like that, you've probably heard of box breathing before. I think this is a really great place to start. It's very simple. It's very easy. Essentially what it is like a box. You're going to inhale for 4 seconds. You're going to hold your breath for 4 seconds. You're going to exhale for 4 seconds, and you're going to hold for 4 seconds. And you just keep repeating that cycle 4 to 5 seconds in each of those phases. More importantly than that, it's how you're doing your diaphragmatic breath. Now, I'm not going to necessarily sit and break down how to do the breathing here. This is essentially belly breathing. So we are breathing into our core canister, lengthening our pelvic floor, expanding our rib cage, and just kind of helping kind of that breath go a little deeper than just staying shallow into our chest. But rather than walking you through exactly how I do it here, I actually have a video explaining this. I think it's maybe 4 minutes or so. So I'm just going to go ahead and link that video in the show notes for you. That way you can watch the video and sort of do it along with me while while you're practicing. You can kind of hear the cues and things that are really helpful. I think it's probably much more effective to listen to it that way than it is to try to talk about it through the podcast. But we really are just talking standard diaphragmatic breath work. So if you are somebody that's done diaphragmatic breathing before and you're familiar with it, perfect. This is a really good place to start. The one thing that I will say with this is a lot of people are familiar with doing diaphragmatic breath work, but they're not necessarily doing it correctly, which is why I want you guys to go watch the video that I'm going to link in the show notes. Specifically with my hip patients, where I find that they are not doing things correct, is they're not lengthening through the pelvic floor. And that piece is going to be extremely important because those pelvic floor muscles are also part of the hip system. They're the deep hip rotators. And many people who are struggling with impingement and labral tears, that guarding and that tension that you're getting, a lot of it happens in the pelvic floor. And so you can do the diaphragmatic breathing, but if you're not actually finding the length through the pelvic floor, it's not going to be as effective as it could be. So definitely still go watch that video and I'll kind of talk you through what all that means. But nonetheless, again, really safe place to start to re-regulate that nervous system. Maybe mobility feels good to you and stretching does feel somewhat good to you. And then it might just be a matter of inserting some diaphragmatic breathing while you do your mobility work. Maybe you can do it prior to your stretching. So you do 3 to 5 minutes of some deep breathing and then you go into some stretching so that that body isn't guarding and resisting the stretch and kind of fighting against you, but it's actually has found some length in the muscles and it's allowing the mobility to happen. When you get good at it, a lot of times I'll just have my clients do the breathing while they do their mobility work. So it's kind of happening at the same time, saves a little bit of time. I don't always recommend this if you're not good at knowing how to stretch in a way that feels good to your body, or you're not good at diaphragmatic breathing. You kind of want to do them separate first, and then as you get better at it, you can pull them together. to save some time. But sometimes it's just the strategy around how you're doing your stretching, right? If stretching does, because for a lot of people, stretching and mobility is still warranted, it's still necessary. But if your body's in this really tense, hyper vigilant state, that neuromuscular system is just like on overdrive, and then you try to stretch, it's really just going to make it worse, right? So if we can calm the nervous system down first and then do our mobility work, it often is far more effective at actually getting the muscle length and changes that we're trying to achieve versus continuously just fighting against that tension. So we have to work with our neuromuscular system, not against it. All right, so another tip and thing that you can do to help re-regulate your nervous system is a little bit of mindfulness and meditation. So this, as you can imagine, sort of goes hand in hand with the breath work. But I do think for some people, focusing on diaphragmatic breathing is really hard. It feels laborious and it doesn't feel natural. And so sometimes we don't even focus on the diaphragmatic breathing to begin with. We just focus on a little bit of meditation. And again, I have a meditation that I've recorded in the past that I can share with you guys. Again, I'll share it in the show notes. It's a good starting point of just trying to notice what's happening in your body and release some of that tension. I can't count how many times I've had a patient who's come into the clinic and they are just so flared up, and I can tell they are stressed and their nervous system's on overdrive, and like no matter what we do, it's just we're fighting against that nervous system. So how many times have I just shut off the lights and said, we're going to meditate, and we lay down on some yoga mats and we do some meditation as part of their therapy. Almost every single time I've done that with somebody, the immediate response is, I feel so much better, right? Not only mentally, but their pain actually starts to lessen and lower, because if your pain is being kind of pushed forward by this nervous system dysregulation and tension, we have to get rid of the root cause, right? So we can start to re-regulate that nervous system and get the systems to sort of let go and melt away some of that stress and tension that you're holding in your hips. And that right there can release so much of the pain that you're feeling. And again, sometimes it's this mentality of I just need to stretch more and I need to stretch harder and I have to do, more. Really, what I want you to do is take a step back, especially if you've been doing all that and it's not working and it's not making it better. Sometimes I want you to do a little less. I don't want you to push harder. I want you to work with your body, not against it. So slowing down, doing some mindfulness, doing some meditation, this is the perfect way to re-regulate things and get yourself in a better place where you're feeling better. Now, again, we can pair this right with diaphragmatic breath, so you certainly can do this together. They don't have to be two separate things. Sometimes people, like I said, they just really struggle with it, and so it is okay to choose one or the other. This is never like a all or nothing situation. You want to do what works best for your body. The last thing that is really going to help you, aside from just more stretching and mobility, is making sure that you are building awareness in your body and understanding if you are somebody that is holding on to this extra tension. What that will help you do is it will help you reduce the amount of constant bracing that you feel like you're doing. So my hip people, I usually call them my chronic butt clenchers or butt squeezers, because they are 24/7 glutes turned on. Myself included. I notice this all the time. Like if I'm driving or I'm cooking, I'm like, gosh, why am I squeezing my glutes right now? I don't need them. But it's just this, it's either a habit or it's our nervous system, again, telling our body something isn't safe. And so we have to be aware of that so that we can change it. And so pulling in some conscious awareness in the beginning, and it will feel in the beginning like you are having to think about it all the time. The more aware of it that you become, the easier it will be to release some of that tension. But if you don't even know that it's happening, it's really hard to change it. So pull that awareness into your body periodically throughout the day. Sometimes a little post-it note, or, coupled with another movement, like if you're sitting in the car driving, what are my glutes doing? Or if I'm standing stirring dinner, what are my glutes doing? Whatever it is. You'll start to notice the patterns of maybe when you tend to tense more. And then figuring out, well, how do I release that tension? And this again is where we can come back to maybe doing, I think the first thing to try is some diaphragmatic breath work, some pelvic floor lengthening exercises, things like that, that will help you actually be able to release it. But we do want to at least make sure, if you're constantly braced and guarded, especially in those glute muscles or pelvic floor muscles, that is going to contribute to a lot of pain. And so you have to just be aware that it's happening and just release it, let it go. This feels really strange for people, especially when you are used to constantly being tense. So I see it a lot in my dancers who are often told, like, use your turnout muscles, use your core, turn everything on. I see it a lot in women who have been told, like, suck it in, right? Like, watch your posture, hold everything in. Well, guess what? That creates a lot of pelvic floor tension, a lot of glute tension. And no amount of stretching is going to change that. We have to change it from a deeper level. We have to be aware that, hey, I don't need all that tension. I don't need to hold all that tension. Otherwise, maybe it relaxes and releases when I'm stretching, but then I finish the stretch, I go back to standing and moving exactly how I was doing it before, and it all comes right back. And hence the cycle that we get stuck in of, I stretch all the time, nothing makes it better, or it makes it worse. You haven't done anything to change it on a deeper level. So I think all of these things, the breathing, the meditation, and just kind of backing off, slowing down, and then building awareness to not constantly be braced and tensed in those glute and pelvic floor muscles, these are the places that I want sort of everybody to start. They are not easy things to do by any means. I mean, I guess they're simple to do, but they are not easy to do because these habits are very much ingrained within us. It's just the problem lies in that if I am constantly, if the only way that I'm trying to address this tension that I'm feeling is stretching, I really haven't addressed the root cause and the problem that's underlying it all. So no amount of stretching is going to make that feel better. I think the other thing that we sort of want to start to think about here is how you're using your body, what your movement patterns look like, how you are stabilizing, because the more that you stabilize the joint in an effective way and with good movement patterns, the more that reflexive guarding and tension is going to be able to start to melt away. So for the majority of my clients, we're not focused a ton on mobility. Now, there's certainly a place for mobility, but we're not always focused a ton on mobility. We're focused a lot on, let's change your movement patterns and let's make those joints really stable so that your body doesn't feel like it constantly has to protect itself and create tension. So this is what we are going to talk about next week. I'm going to save it for a separate episode. I really want to dive into the difference between mobility and stability and what it is that you need to do in your body to create more of a safe space and help it trust itself again so that you are able to be even more efficient. Once you re-regulate the nervous system, you make sure that that tension doesn't keep coming back. And so that's what we're going to dive into in next week's episode. For today, what I really want your takeaway to be is if you're constantly stretching, you're constantly foam rolling, you feel no change, it's not making it better or it's making it worse. Flexibility and stretching is probably not the answer to your problems. It's probably looking at something else, and in this case, we're talking about the nervous system re-regulation. So the 3 ways that you can start to work on that are breathing, meditation, and releasing the tension by not clenching the glutes and pelvic floor 24/7, but actually finding some length in those muscles. The last thing that I'll leave you with here is how important it is to build trust within your body. So I started talking about this a bit more in the beginning of the session or beginning of the podcast, but this is an idea that I think, people with hip impingement and labral tears and chronic pain really struggle with this ability to trust in their own body. And so just remember, the only way that you get to a place where this becomes more lasting and permanent is by finding little ways to build that trust. So every time you do a movement, it's sort of like you're depositing a coin in the trust bank of, okay, I did a squat and you know what? My body didn't freak out. I didn't flare up. So some of that tension, it tells your brain, okay, I can let go a little bit. That wasn't so bad. Nothing bad happened. And then you do it over and over and over again until eventually that squat that used to cause a pinch and it used to cause you go into a full-blown panic, it doesn't cause anything anymore. Now you can actually strengthen it. And the only way that we build that trust in our body is through repetition and knowing how much is safe to push. If you're ever not sure how much is safe to push, again, that's where working with somebody who is skilled in this is going to be your best bet, because we will walk you through it. We will guide you through what's okay to feel, what's not okay to feel, how much do I push, when do I need to pull back. So I do think, again, as always, it's super important to work with somebody who understands this and your body and can teach you what your body is saying and how to respond. So guys, I hope that was super helpful for you. I love talking about nervous system regulation and the role of breathing and our neuromuscular system in this hip pain, because it is just so intertwined. We cannot separate these two things apart. So I hope that this was helpful and it gives you a good starting point. Be sure to join me back here next week, where we talk a little bit about the difference of mobility and stability, and how we can start using strength and muscle activation to actually be more effective than stretching by itself. So I will see you guys back here next week. Drop any comments, questions below in the comment section, and I will see you guys really soon. Have a good day.